Gold digger wife thought she'd get my trust fund. Got prison instead. I'm 30, born and raised in Chicago, and yeah, I'm one of those trust fund kids you've probably heard about. Before you roll your eyes, let me just say, I try not to be that guy. My dad was the definition of self-made. He started a business back in the 80s, built it from the ground up, and eventually turned it into this big deal. He and my mom worked their butts off, and when I was younger, they made it clear that just because they had money didn't mean I could coast through life. Honestly, I'm grateful for that. They taught me to work hard, and when my dad got sick a few years ago, I took over running the company. I'm not gonna lie though, having money makes things complicated. Friendships, relationships, even casual conversations sometimes feel like a minefield. You can't help but wonder if people like you or for what's in your bank account. And let's be real, it's not like you can just bring that up in casual conversation. So, yeah, I've always been a little cautious when it comes to letting people in. Which brings me to Ashley. We met at my college graduation. She was a friend of a friend. One of those, hey, you two should meet setups that usually turn out awkward, but for once didn't. She was funny, down to earth, and so different from anyone I'd ever dated before. She didn't seem impressed by the money, the family name, or any of that stuff. Honestly, it was refreshing. We hit it off right away and started dating. Within a few months, I was head over heels. She was smart, ambitious, and she had this way of making me feel like I could just be myself. No pretenses, no second-guessing. A year later, we got married in this small, intimate ceremony. It was perfect, or at least, it felt that way at the time. My parents adored her, which was a big deal for me. They were cautious about people in my life, but Ashley, she won them over like it was nothing. They even added her as a beneficiary to the family trust. At the time, I thought it was a sign of how much they trusted her. Looking back now, I can't decide if it was that or if she was just that good at playing the part. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Around the time we got married, Ashley started spending a lot of time with Rob, the guy who managed the family trust. He'd been working with my parents for years, so I never thought twice about it. They'd talk about investments or tax stuff, which honestly bored me to death, so I was more than happy to let them handle it. If I'm being honest, I probably should have paid closer attention. But when someone you love tells you they're just taking care of business, you trust them, right? Anyway, that's where it all started. I didn't know it then, but those little moments, Ashley's late-night meetings with Rob, the way she'd brush off my questions with that easy smile of hers, they were the beginning of everything falling apart. Fast forward a bit. Ashley and I were married, living what I thought was a pretty solid life. My parents were still around back then, so there was a lot of family stuff going on. Holidays, dinners, charity events, you name it. Ashley fit right in. She had this charm about her that made people instantly like her. My mom used to say, "She's a keeper, Aaron. You're lucky." And I believed it. I mean, how could I not? She was everything I thought I wanted. Supportive, smart, funny. She even acted like she didn't care about the money. We had this unspoken agreement to keep things simple. No crazy shopping sprees, no Real Housewives drama. It was just us building what I thought was a normal marriage. But looking back now, there were little things, tiny red flags I completely ignored. Like how she always seemed to know just a little too much about the trust fund. Don't get me wrong, I'm not clueless. I know what's in there and how it works, but Ashley? She seemed almost obsessed with it. She'd casually bring up questions about how it was set up or how the beneficiaries worked. At the time, I thought she was just curious. And then there was Rob. Rob was the trust fund manager, basically the guy who made sure everything ran smoothly. He'd been with my family for years, and my dad trusted him completely. I did too, by default. But after we got married, Ashley and Rob started spending a lot of time together. At first, it made sense. They were both dealing with the trust fund stuff, which I had zero interest in. But then it got weird. She'd come home from these meetings with him and be in the best mood, almost giddy. If I asked what they talked about, she'd wave it off. Oh, just boring finance stuff. You don't want to hear about it. And honestly, she was right. I didn't. I figured as long as the bills were paid and the trust was doing its thing, I didn't need to micromanage. But there were little moments that nagged at me, like the way Rob would text her at odd hours, or how she'd laugh at his jokes a little too hard when we all hung out. And once, during a dinner party, I caught this look between them, just a split second, but it stuck with me. I brushed it off because, well, you don't want to be that guy. The paranoid husband. We were married for a little over 2 years when my parents passed away. First my dad, then my mom, both within 6 months of each other. It was brutal. They were the anchors in my life, and suddenly they were just gone. Ashley was there for me, at least at first. She played the supportive wife role perfectly, holding my hand at the funerals, making sure I ate, telling me I didn't have to face everything alone. But not long after the dust settled, she started to change. It was subtle at first. She got more distant, more distracted. She started spending more time at the gym or running errands, and I found myself alone in the house a lot. I chalked it up to her coping in her own way. I mean, she'd been close to my parents too, so I figured she was grieving in her own way. But then one day, about 6 months after my mom passed, I came home early from work. It was one of those rare days when I just couldn't focus, and I figured Ashley and I could grab lunch or something. When I walked in, the house was quiet, too quiet. I called out for her, but there was no answer. At first, I thought maybe she'd gone out. But then I heard it. Voices coming from the bedroom. I'll never forget that moment. My stomach dropped. My hands started shaking. I don't even know how I managed to walk down the hall without collapsing. When I opened the door, there they were, Ashley and Rob, standing by the bed with suitcases. She didn't even try to hide it. "Oh," she said like it was no big deal. Like I hadn't just walked in on my wife and the guy managing my family's wealth about to take off together. I couldn't even speak. My mind was racing. Anger, disbelief, humiliation. It all hit me at once. Before I could say anything, she hit me with the dagger. "We need to talk," she said, her voice calm, almost bored. "I want a divorce." And just like that, my world fell apart. I don't even know how I stayed standing in that moment. It felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me, and I was just free falling. I kept staring at her, waiting for some kind of explanation, or maybe even an apology. But Ashley? She didn't even flinch. "I've been meaning to tell you," she said, like we were talking about returning a pair of shoes or something. "Rob and I were leaving. Tonight." Rob, for his part, just stood there like a deer in headlights. He wouldn't even look me in the eye. I wanted to punch him so badly, but I think I was too stunned to move. "Are you serious?" was all I managed to get out. My voice cracked, and I hated how pathetic I sounded. Ashley sighed, like I was inconveniencing her by being there. "Look, Aaron, this isn't working. It hasn't been working for a while. I didn't want you to find out like this, but well, here we are. Here we are." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was the woman I'd married. The woman who had stood next to me at my parents' funerals, who had told me over and over that she loved me. And now she was just done? What the hell is going on? I asked, my voice finally finding some strength. "You're leaving me?" "For him." I gestured at Rob, who was still standing there like an idiot. Ashley rolled her eyes. "Don't make this dramatic, Aaron." "Yes, I'm leaving. And yes, it's with Rob. We're going to Italy for a while. I think we both need a fresh start." "Italy." She said it like she was talking about a weekend getaway, not the complete destruction of my life. And then it hit me. This wasn't just about the affair. This was about the trust, the money, my family's legacy. "You've been planning this, haven't you?" I said, my voice shaking with anger. "This whole time, you've been plotting to screw me over." Ashley didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it either. Instead, she gave me this patronizing look like I was a kid throwing a tantrum. "Aaron, I don't have time for this. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce." And just like that, she grabbed one of the suitcases, turned on her heel, and walked out the door. Rob followed her, mumbling something about being sorry, though it didn't sound like he meant it. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the empty doorway. My wife, my life, was gone. The next few weeks were a blur. I didn't eat. I barely slept. I stopped going to work. My friends tried to check in on me, but I ignored their calls. I felt humiliated, betrayed, and completely alone. But the worst part? I couldn't stop thinking about the trust. Ashley had been added as a beneficiary when we got married, and with my parents gone, I was terrified of what she might try to do. I had no idea how deep this went, or how much damage she and Rob might have already done. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Sandra showed up. So one afternoon, I was sitting on my couch. Well, more like sinking into the couch, surrounded by empty takeout containers and unopened mail. when there was a knock at the door. I almost didn't answer it. I figured it was another well-meaning friend or someone dropping off a casserole or whatever people do when they think your life's falling apart. But the knocking didn't stop. Reluctantly, I got up, still in the same sweatpants I'd been wearing for 3 days, and opened the door. Standing there was Sandra. Now, I'd met Sandra a couple of times before at charity events and fundraisers. She was Rob's wife, and from what I remembered, she seemed nice enough, quiet, polite, always smiling. But the woman standing on my doorstep wasn't smiling. She looked pissed. "Aaron," she said, brushing past me and walking into the living room like she owned the place. "We need to talk." I was too stunned to argue, so I just closed the door and followed her. She turned to face me, and I could see she was holding a folder. "I know about Ashley and Rob," she said, getting straight to the point. Hearing their names together hit me like a punch to the gut, but I tried to play it cool. "Yeah, well, join the club," I muttered, flopping back onto the couch. "They're probably sipping wine in Tuscany by now." Sandra didn't sit down. She just stood there, staring at me with this intensity that made me feel like I was being interrogated. "Do you know what else they've been doing?" I blinked at her. "What do you mean?" She sighed, clearly frustrated. "They've been stealing from you, Aaron. From the trust. I have proof." That got my attention. I sat up, suddenly wide awake. "What?" Sandra opened the folder and handed me a stack of papers. "Rob's an idiot. He's been careless with emails and transfers, and I've been suspicious for months." I didn't want to believe it at first, but then I found this. I started flipping through the documents. Most of it was over my head, financial statements, bank records, spreadsheets, but even I could see that something was seriously wrong. There were transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, withdrawals that didn't make sense, and a trail that led straight to Ashley and Rob. "They've been siphoning money out of the trust for over a year," Sandra said, her voice cold. "I think Ashley was a mastermind, but Rob's just as guilty. They've been planning this for a long time, Aaron." I felt like I couldn't breathe. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sandra hesitated. "Million. Million." I slumped back against the couch, my head spinning. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was theft on a massive scale. Sandra sat down across from me, her expression softening just a little. "Listen, I know you're going through hell right now. Trust me, I get it. But we can't let them get away with this. They think they're untouchable, but they're not. I've already started gathering evidence. And if we work together, we can take them down." I looked at her, trying to process everything. Sandra, the quiet, unassuming wife of the guy who'd just wrecked my life, was asking me to team up with her to take on Ashley and Rob. And honestly, I didn't have much to lose. "All right," I said after a long pause. "Let's do it." Her lips curved into a small, determined smile. "Good, because I've got a plan." What followed was a crash course in financial detective work. Sandra was ruthless. She combed through emails, pieced together bank statements, and even hired a private investigator to follow up on leads. Meanwhile, I worked on pulling myself together, both for the fight ahead and because, frankly, Sandra wasn't going to let me wallow anymore. We started finding more and more evidence of their scheme. Ashley had been using her access to the trust to move money into shell accounts, all under the guise of investments. Rob had been approving everything, of course, and they'd both been living it up on stolen money. The kicker? Sandra found an email from Ashley to Rob, laying out their plan to disappear to Italy and live the life they deserved. It was sickening. One night, after a long day of digging through records, Sandra and I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by papers and laptops. "Why are you helping me?" I asked her, breaking the silence. Sandra looked up from her laptop. "Because I'm tired of being the doormat," she said simply. "Rob's been lying to me for years, but this, what he did to me, to you, to your family, it's unforgivable. And I'm not going to let him get away with it." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of solidarity with her. We were both victims of the same betrayal, and now we had a common goal: justice. The first step was filing a lawsuit. Sandra's private investigator had uncovered enough evidence to build a strong case, and my lawyer was more than happy to take it on. But we knew it wouldn't be easy. Ashley and Rob were slippery, and they'd do everything they could to cover their tracks. Still, for the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Let me tell you, The weeks leading up to the lawsuit were some of the most exhausting, nerve-wracking days of my life. Sandra and I were running on caffeine, spite, and pure adrenaline. I was spending more time with her than I had with anyone in years, and honestly, she became my rock. It's funny how betrayal forces people together. Before all this, Sandra and I were practically strangers, just peripheral figures in each other's lives. But now, we were this unlikely team, united by a shared mission to destroy Ashley and Rob. Of course, Ashley didn't make it easy. When she got wind of the lawsuit, probably from Rob, she started calling me. At first, I ignored her. Just seeing her name pop up on my phone made my stomach turn. But one night, after her fifth call in a row, I finally picked up. "What do you want, Ashley?" I said, my voice cold. She sighed dramatically, like this was all some big inconvenience for her. "Aaron, can we just talk? You don't have to do this. The lawyers, the lawsuit, it's all so unnecessary." I almost laughed. "Unnecessary? You stole from me, Ashley. From my family. You and Rob both. What exactly do you think I'm supposed to do?" There was a pause, and then her voice softened. "Aaron, I'm sorry, okay? I made a mistake, but this doesn't have to get ugly. We can work something out." And there it was. She was trying to manipulate me, just like she always had. For a split second, I felt that old pull, the part of me that had loved her, that had trusted her. But then I remembered everything she'd done. The lies, the betrayal, the way she'd looked me in the eye and told me she was leaving me for Rob. "Save it," I said, cutting her off. "You don't get to play nice now. See you in court." And then I hung up. Sandra, of course, was thrilled when I told her. "She's panicking," she said, grinning. "That means we're winning." The real turning point came a few days later. Sandra had been trying to get Ashley on record admitting to the scheme, and she finally got her chance. She called Ashley under the pretense of wanting to talk woman to woman, and I guess Ashley took the bait. Sandra recorded the whole thing, and let me tell you, it was gold. At first, Ashley tried to play the victim, saying she was pressured by Rob and didn't know what she was getting into. But Sandra didn't let up. She kept pushing, asking all the right questions, and eventually, Ashley cracked. "Fine," Ashley snapped. "Yes, okay? I took the money. Rob helped me. But it doesn't matter. You'll never prove it in court." Sandra played me the recording later that night, and I swear I almost hugged her. "This is it," I said. "This is the nail in their coffin." And it was. When the court date finally rolled around, we were ready. My lawyers presented all the evidence. The bank records, the emails, the recorded confession. And Ashley and Rob didn't stand a chance. They tried to deny everything, of course, but the judge wasn't buying it. In the end, the court ruled in our favor. Ashley and Rob were held responsible for the stolen funds, and they both faced criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. The trust was safe, and Sandra and I walked out of that courtroom victorious. But it didn't stop there. A few weeks after the verdict, Rob showed up at Sandra's house drunk out of his mind. He was screaming and pounding on the door, demanding to see her. Sandra called me in a panic, and I drove over as fast as I could. By the time I got there, Rob was gone, but Sandra was shaken, and her daughter, Emily, was in tears. Seeing Emily like that, scared, clutching her mom's hand, it broke something in me. I stayed with them that night, helping calm Emily down and reassuring Sandra that Rob wouldn't hurt them. After everything Sandra had done for me, it felt good to finally be able to help her in return. Over the next few months, things slowly started to settle. Rob and Ashley were facing jail time, and Rob was ordered to pay child support to Sandra. I went back to work, trying to rebuild my life, and Sandra focused on taking care of Emily. We stayed close, though. After everything we'd been through, it was hard not to. She and Emily became like family to me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone. Looking back, I don't know if I'd call this whole mess a blessing in disguise. It was painful, humiliating, and it nearly broke me. But I will say this, it taught me who I could trust, and it showed me that even in the darkest times, you can find people who will stand by you.